So hello everyone. I'm Rob from Utopia Theatre. I just had a couple of things to introduce and just say how we're going to work the format for today. So the plan is it's going to be in 3 sections, each covering a different topic. And as Dr. Kene and Oladipo are talking, if you could just type any questions you have in the chat, and if you set it to send to everyone, so everyone can see your questions as you're asking them. And then at the end of each section, we'll come to specific people, and at that point you could unmute and just ask your question in person. So that would be great. Or if you just want to, we could just read it out if you'd rather just specify that. Okay, so thanks for everyone for joining, and I'm going to hand over to Dr. Kene.
All right, hello, good morning everyone, and thanks for joining us this glorious morning. Well, it's glorious here where I'm in Canterbury. All right, so welcome to this In Conversation. My name is Kene Igweonu, and I'm the president of the African Theatre Association, and I work at Middlesex University as Deputy Dean for Research and Knowledge Exchange in the Faculty of Arts and Creative Industries. My background obviously is theatre, African theatre and performance, but I don't want to talk so much about myself today. You can find out a little bit about myself on the net if you want to. And I'm also not going to be reading Oladipo's biography, because again, you can find out a lot about him on the internet. But I'm going to invite him, I'm going to start off by inviting him to describe himself to us. Oladipo, as you know, or Dipo as we call him, Oladipo Agboluaje, or Dipo as we call him, as you know, he's an award-winning Nigerian-British playwright. And but I'm going to invite him right now, Dipo. So there may be people here who perhaps don't really know much about yourself, apart from maybe they've seen one of your plays or heard about you, or read a few things on the internet. How would you describe yourself to people who perhaps haven't encountered you before?
Hey, thank you, Kene. Oh God, how would I describe myself? Well, yeah, first and foremost, yeah, I would regard myself as a writer, specifically a playwright. I love writing for the stage. I love TV, I love films, but my first love has always been the stage. There's something about live performance that just does it for me every time. So even when people come to me and say, oh, I've got this TV project or film project I want you to work on with me, I'm like, yes. And the first thing I visualize is, how does it work on the stage, you know? And it takes me a while to get myself out of that mindset. To actually start think about the form I'm sort of expected to write in. So I'm very much a big I'm a theatre person, is what I would regard myself as. In terms of identity, I've always called myself British Nigerian, and one of the reasons. The major reason why I do that is because I consider myself to be a child of both worlds. I grew up in England first, and I went back to Nigeria with my parents. And I did a lot of my education in Nigeria. I did my theatre education in Nigeria before I came back to England again, and then continued my formal education and continued my theatre education. So in terms of my experiences, I've always considered myself sort of that hyphenated identity, British Nigerian. There's an interesting TED talk by Taye Selassie, which you can find on YouTube. I think the title is something like, you know, don't ask me where I'm from, ask me where I am a local. And what she does is she says that, you know, what we are, since we are as people, we are informed by majorly our experiences. So what makes a person, say, an African is by being located in Africa, but also by having an African sensibility. Maybe even if you weren't born there, like myself, born in England, I grew up in Hackney. So I ate Nigerian food before I knew it was Nigerian food, because that was the food my parents fed me on. So I didn't know that eba or amala was English or Nigerian food. It was just food, because that's what we ate in our household. It's only when I got back to Nigeria that I realized, oh, it's not British food, it's Nigerian food. Okay, great, no worries. I liked it before, so it doesn't really matter. So, so for me, I consider myself a person of all those experiences, of my life experiences, and the two biggest influences have been, England, specifically London, and Nigeria, specifically a town called Abeokuta, which is quite close to Lagos, which is the former capital. So that's how I would describe myself. In terms of my writing, I'd say I tend more towards the satirical. And a lot of that, again, is to do with my own experiences, again, of growing up in Nigeria, watching Nigerian comedies and satires. Because Nigeria is still a country which we consider to be sort of still in a development phase, a lot of the teething issues of nationality, post-colonial issues, they are still in the forefront of the kind of work back then when I was living in Nigeria in the 1780s, was still utmost on the mind of most artists. So I'm sure most of you, I'll actually assume, but I'm sure a few of you might know the musician Fela Kuti and the kind of music that he makes, which is actually very particular. His music, a lot of people around the world enjoy his music, but his music is very particular in that he speaks very much to the Nigerian situation. So there are certain songs of his that deal with more global issues and with Africa, but most of his music was concentrated on the politics of Nigeria. And his music was fierce, it was political, it was satirical at the same time. So it wasn't just watching theater shows and TV dramas, comedies that gave me that sensibility of satire. It was also musicians like Fela Kuti as well, who spoke to the conditions of particularly the underclass of Nigeria and by extension, the world. So that seems kind of my sort of creative influence, along with the major Nigerian playwrights like Wole Soyinka and Femi Osofison. When I was in university in Nigeria, at the University of Benin, we did a major production of Femi Osofison's satire, satire stroke farce, Midnight Hotel, which was an adaptation of a French drama, but 100% transposed to a Nigerian environment. And that was that play, again, was one of the big influences on my wanting to being a satirical playwright. It was the most successful play that was ever done at the university at that time. So yeah, those are the kind of things, that's what I would consider myself. So British Nigerian, satirical, political playwright.
All right, thank you so much for that. I think that's really very well rounded the description of yourself. But I'm just wondering if you could just maybe extend that discussion a little bit to look at the maybe the kind of creative tension that you experience as a Nigerian and a British person. How would you describe that? What kind of, are there tensions inherent in those two, that duality? And how do you manage those tensions?
Yeah,
both in yourself and in your work.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. There are tensions. I think it's interesting because I come from a sort of a different kind of perspective. And being born, I've lived half my life in England, half my life in Nigeria, in three tranches, as it were. And there's always a tension, I think, when you are sort of an in-between. I consider myself like an in-between person who's, in a sense, neither comfortable, either 100% comfortable in England or 100% comfortable in Nigeria. And for me, I think it was quite common, because particularly when I was living in Nigeria, a lot of my my parents and their parents' generation, many of them went to England or to America to study, and they came back to Nigeria. And so it wasn't just something that was specific or unique to me. There was a group of us where we would be at school and talking about issues about how our parents were being affected at work, certain things that weren't going right, and our parents didn't understand or quite get how to deal with such problems. So that I saw up front. I was recalling this morning, one of my friends whose situation and his parents' situation sort of paralleled my own parents' situation in Nigeria. My father couldn't cope with, he was fed up with England. That was one of the reasons why he said we're going back to Nigeria. It wasn't a planned kind of, we're planning to go. He just had enough and said, that's it, we're going back. So we go back, and of course, some of the issues regarding, he realizes probably a bit too late that, he's also changed by his own experiences of living, somewhere else. And so there were all these kind of contradictions that we were coming up against because a lot of the people were thinking, oh, we're going to get education, we'll come back and we'll help our country and we'll do this and we'll do that. But the politics of Nigeria, and you must remember that Nigeria is a complex country. It's a country of nearly over 300 ethnicities that were bound together by a colonial map. It wasn't the different ethnic groups had no say in whether they wanted to be together. So like most of Africa, the boundaries are not natural boundaries. And the associations were not natural associations of people agreeing, let's do this together. So when you've come, and one mustn't forget that a lot of the so-called the Pan-African groups, a lot of the idea of Pan-Africanism was developed outside of Africa by Africans and people from the Caribbean and from the diaspora coming together and meeting in places like London, France, and New York. So there's something I think that's a bit similar, but not quite the same, that mirrored that generation of my parents' generation who went and then came back. And they sadly couldn't resolve some of the contradictions of what it meant to return home, to try and contribute your quota to a nation that may not see itself in the same way that they saw it, you see. So in that way, I sort of embody, I'm sort of an embodiment of that experience. That those contradictions are also in me, because I grew up, I felt those contradictions. I was, I lived within those contradictions, and they still live within me. So yeah, that's in a rush, that's how I would answer that question.
And that's a really good answer. But I'm just going to pick up on the word that you use. You talk about contradictions, and you also use the word reconciliation. So two words I really want to pick up on. How do you see your own experience of kind of trying to bridge that the contradictions that your parents' generations, parents' generation found difficult to reconcile, and being able to reconcile that in yourself, in the way you write, in the way you articulate your identity? How do you see that experience resonating with young Black people, British people, young people from African backgrounds living in Britain today, or who are British? How do you think they are able to reconcile that better, or do you think they've taken a step from where you? How do they deal with this question of duality of their existence?
I think they deal with them differently, in the same way, as I said, the generations of my parents dealt with it differently as compared to the pre-independence / independence generation. And I think they're coping well, because what they've done mostly is to challenge their parents, because what's happened is you've got a situation where a lot of parents at a certain point began not to tell their children about their African side, about their African heritage. And all of a sudden they find themselves in a similar position as me, trying to how do I square the contradictions of living as a Black person living in Britain? But I've got nothing else to go against. And so I started to ask their friends, why didn't you teach me my language? You know, I've got a language. Why didn't you never taught me that? And it's odd because when you think about it, even it's a phenomenon that's taking place in Nigeria now, where you've got a lot of young Nigerians whose parents don't speak to them in their own language at home. So you've got, I feel that when you're in a certain situation such as we are, a sense of identity is stronger. The need for an identity, a core, a sense of belonging is much stronger than people who just assume, you know, if you live in a country like in Nigeria or Ghana or Liberia, you just assume that you are who you are, you're Black, you're among Black people. And so, yeah, the way you engage with modernity, the way you absorb other influences is quite different than somebody who lives sort of outside in the diaspora, where these sort of, the way you take on different identities is more politically charged. So it was, I'd say the younger ones are actually doing quite well. You've got groups now. I do some work at the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, in London. And the number of students who take local African languages, you know, has been growing over the years. I sort of have had an association with them since, either as a member of one of their institutes or as a lecturer, a visiting lecturer there, since 1999. And the numbers and the numbers of groups of young people forming organizations and associations, you know, taking on the establishment in terms of decolonizing their curriculum, are things which you probably 10, 15 years ago you never heard of. So I think they're doing very, very well. And I think they're asking the right questions and engaging with them, the authorities in a way which most of our parents always had a sense of, well, I'm going back. This is not my country. I'm going back home. So I don't care. They can do whatever they like, you know. But for a lot of younger people, they're like, no, I share roots here as well as there. So in a sense, that's them dealing with their own duality. A few years ago, I went for a conference in Lagos, and there were a number of young British Nigerians who were there. And we were talking, I was like, yeah, I'm just going to come see what it's like. If in 5 or 6 years it doesn't work out, I can always go back to London. But I'm going to stay here, and I'm here for the long haul. I'm not here for a holiday. I'm not here just to spend a few weeks to see my family. I'm actually here to live. And if it works, it works. And then I'll stay here. So the way they're parlaying their choices as well, they're making these really conscious decisions and also they're very aware of their duality of their identities, that they can, you know, that they have options, and they can use those options to you know, in ways that sort of facilitate their own well-being and enhance their identities.
Thank you very much, Dipo. Can I remind everyone, please, if you have a question or a comment, do drop them in the chat for us to pick up. So this conversation is going to go in 3 different segments. So we're in the first segment of that conversation, but we want you to send your questions now so that when we get to the end of this segment, we will pick up some of those questions. I'm going to invite you, if you've dropped any question in the chat, to either read your question to us, to ask it yourself, or if you want me to, I could ask Dipo that question. So please go ahead and begin to do that right now if you've got questions or comments. All right, Dipo, you describe yourself as a satirical political playwright. And I think that's quite a lot to take in already. And there is a saying that stories help us to make sense of the world we live in. And you're a playwright, a storyteller par excellence. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started out as a playwright, as a satirical political playwright? You've already kind of hinted at it when you talked about influence, but can you tell us a little bit about how you actually started in terms of the practical, what, for example, your first play and all that?
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, the funny thing is that I actually started off writing in Nigeria in primary school as a comic book writer. I was a big fan of comic books, you know, Spider-Man, Thor, and all that stuff. And what my brother was very good at drawing. So what he did was, you know, he'd draw the stories, and I would write them, and I would fill in the bubbles, you know, the dialogue bubbles on the on the panels. And what we did was, we started to create Nigerian superheroes. So, you know, Marvel Comics had Thor, God of Thunder. We had Shango, you know, God of Thunder, our own equivalent. You know, we had Ogun, we had them as superheroes working in contemporary Nigeria. So, and from there I moved on to short stories. And then after that, when I went to University of Nigeria, then that's when I did a theatre arts degree. And then I started to take playwriting seriously. And when I came back to England, I actually started off doing poetry. So I would go to these spoken word events, the Poetry Cafe, you know, there's and other organizations like Express Access and so on, some of them which aren't around anymore. And then it was while I was doing my MA that my creative writing tutor was the novelist Deborah Levy, and then she read one of my pieces and said, "It sounds it's very vocal. It's got a very, you know, it doesn't feel like fiction, you know, narrative. It's like it feels very theatrical." And I said, "Yes, I studied theatre arts when I was in Nigeria." And, well, why don't you just write plays then? So I thought, yeah, I'll give it a try. I will. I'll see, you know. And I thought, yeah, well, maybe I should. So I did. I started writing plays, and then, but of course, coming from England, I didn't know where to start in terms of who do I go to, who do I, you know, who do I ask for help? And so I used to attend one of these sort of nights in Brixton. It was a place called the Cafe Bookshop, or also it was also called the Souls of Black Folk on Cold Harbour Lane. And I met the playwright and filmmaker B. Bandele there, and I told him that I wanted to be a playwright, and you know, and that I'd seen one of his plays, and that I liked everything about it apart from the dialogue, because the dialogue, they felt like they were, you know, African speaking like Europeans. And he said, "Yeah, well, we're not in Nigeria, are we? We're in England." I said, "Yeah, but that's not how we speak." He's like, "No, it doesn't look, you know, when you start writing, you'll see." And I said to him, "Yes, when I start writing, I will make sure that people like you will never, ever get a commission in this country again." Which, we would joke anyway. Most Nigerians would know that kind of Nigerian humor, you know, because he burst out laughing as well. So, but it was a joke anyway. But he was sort of the person who started to, after that, to sort of give me advice on what to do. So I wrote a first play with one of my friends gave me a leaflet for Birmingham Rep. They were looking for new writers, and you didn't even have to finish the play, just send in the first 25 pages or so, and you know. So I wrote and I sent like the first 20 or so pages, about 17 pages I sent to them, and they wrote back and said, "Oh, you know, we like it very much, but the problem is that the call out was only meant for writers living in Birmingham." So, and I'm like, "Oh, great, yes, trust me not to read that vital piece of information." But then they said, "Look, but it doesn't matter. We really like it. If you finish it, we'll find a venue for you in London." So I didn't think they were serious. So I just, you know, went about working. And then a few months later, I got this letter from them asking me if I'd finished the play. So I think I must have written about over 100 pages over a weekend. I didn't even know what I was doing. I think I was on autopilot. Just I thought, well, you know, if they read it long enough, they'll see the words will rearrange themselves into some coherent sense anyway. So they just, yeah, let's go. So, and then they wrote back, yeah, that they really, really like it, and but it needs development. And so they helped me get in touch with Talawa Theatre Company, who put me through a development phase. And then afterwards, Karina Johnson, she now runs Hoxton Hall, but at the time she ran Oval House, the Oval in Kennington. And then she gave me, she said, yep, if you can raise the money for the play, we'll give you the hall free of charge. That will be our contribution. So our producer raised the money, and the play went on. It was a play called Early Morning, about 3 cleaners, Nigerian cleaners living in Britain, and they decide to overthrow the British government and institute a blackocracy in Great Britain. So, and that was very satirical. And it was after that no, in the audience there was Stephen Lucky, who was the producer for Eclipse Theatre at the time, and he saw it, and he gave me his card, and later he phoned up and said, look, I've got a gig for you. We want you to adapt a play. It's a famous German play called Mother Courage by Bertolt Brecht. I was like, oh God. And he was like, why, what's wrong? And I said, well, yeah, I studied Brecht in school, and to be honest, I'm not a fan of it. I'm not really a fan of his. And he's like, oh, just do it, you know. It kind of coerced me to do it. And again, like I said, I was still finding my way in British theatre. I'd only written 1 play. I was still trying to make my way through the theatre. So I said, yeah, I might as well. And I think it's insightful that my first 2-3 plays that I did in this country were with Black organizations. They were with Black organizations although Talawa didn't produce Early Morning, they helped in the development of it. And the lady who who directed the play and produced it was a British Ugandan lady called Emma Woluka-Wanamba. So that I think has been in terms of the start of my career, that's kind of like how I started. But I did do, apart from that, I did go to a lot of theatre. I remember spending a lot of money going to see lots of shows, trying to meet in the hope of also not just seeing the shows, but in the hope of meeting, the creative directors or maybe an artistic director, and then talk to them and introduce myself to them. And in a sense, I think it was a good thing that I didn't read the small print of that leaflet that my friend sent me from Birmingham Rep, because if he didn't, I don't know what might have happened.
That's really a very powerful story. So it's really, you've got to put yourself out there. You've got to learn as much as you can of the craft, but put yourself out there and try everything. So it's really interesting idea to send to, even though you didn't read small print, it still helped you to get that work done. I've got one more question for this segment, and then we've got a couple of questions that are already coming in, which we're going to tackle in a minute. What do you see as some of the main challenges of being a playwright from an African background, writing for mainstream British theatres? What are some of the challenges you see writing for not the mainstream?
Yes. Well, I think that one of the main problems is that the mainstream has an idea of who or what an African is. And in many respects, that the idea of an African, in a sense, certainly in their sense, does not exist. One of the problems that they're very good at, one of the things they're very good at doing is flattening the African experience into one homogeneous blob. And you see it not just in terms of the institutions that produce, but also in the institutions that train. They make no distinction at times between a South African accent, character, and the way a South African moves. And when I say South African, it could be any of the ethnicities. They make no distinctions of that. They make no distinctions in the way a Nigerian from the East would talk or behave compared to somebody from the North. And these are some of the problems that you face. These are structural problems that you face. So that by the time you come up to wanting to even produce work, the problems are already, they're already there for you, and it becomes a massive challenge. So for instance, when I did the Mother Courage play, for instance, it got to a point in rehearsals when I asked the actors to stop with the accents. And I told them, and at the time, I wouldn't have said that now, now that I have more experience, but back then I told them that they were giving me earache, because I have no idea which ethnicity or, they're coming from. I have no, all I mean was, because apparently Africans all say "oh" at the end of every sentence. So that was, I told them just use their natural accents. And there was one gentleman who sort of a Caribbean extra who asked me, and his character was from Liberia, and asked me whether he was doing it right. And I said he was, yep, that it's quite a close approximation, because Liberians speak, because of their American, the association, they speak, it's quite close to it. And he didn't believe me. And so I had to ask him whether he'd been to Liberia or he'd heard Liberians speak. He said no. So I said, then trust me then, you're fine. So what happens on opening night? Me forgetting, of course, that actors use these things as crutches and as, things. So opening night, we're opening, I'm sitting in the auditorium, and all you can hear is, and that was act one, And then what happened on that day also was that they forgot to put my name in the, and picture, my profile in the program. So I was already very angry about that. So when the interval came, the managing, the director and the artistic director both rushed to me to apologize, practically groveling. And they said, look, what's going to happen? We're going to have this big, picture of you framed in the hallway. And, right now it's being made, it's being done right now. By the time the show is over, it will be there. It's okay, fine, whatever, So I go back in. I'm already having a bad time watching the show anyway. So I go back in, and then it doesn't get much better. And so when the show ends, and it was at Nottingham Playhouse, so you've got this 700, it's the biggest audience I'd ever had, 700 people. And so imagine 700 people giving you this, at the end of the show, giving this slow clap, I've never had a way to go like, thank God it's over, What an ordeal, I think some of them became born-again Christians that day, for that experience. Anyway, so I go out into the foyer, and I'm saying to myself, it's even a good thing that I'm not even in the program. And then I see this massive picture of myself in the hallway, about 6 feet tall, of the guy who wrote this rubbish that the audience had just seen. So I actually closed, I was wearing face masks long before COVID, the way I covered my face, and ran out of the venue. Yeah. So it's training. Training is a problem. Then, and also dealing with venues and sometimes with dramaturgs, trying to explain that there are certain concepts that you cannot directly translate within a Western aesthetic. And them trying to make you do it, because they always say their reason for certain things why you can't express yourself fully as a Black writer, not just as an African, but as a Black writer, as a Black British writer, is that the audience won't get it. The majority of our audience is white, and so on and so forth. And then you have to say to them, well, one of the problems that we have in terms of us not understanding each other is that if art is supposed to be the fullest expression of one's identity, of one's being, and then you are saying to me on stage, I should represent myself with one hand tied behind my back. I should, make the language intelligible, you know, there are certain things within the structure that, yes, maybe a Nigerian audience will get it, but a British audience won't get it. Can you just not put that in there? And all of a sudden you've got this thing that is neither fish nor fowl. And my question to them has always been, so are you saying we are pandering to the audience's expectations rather than educating the audience? And by education, I don't mean spelling it out ABC, which is what they want, but of course, according to their own dictates, but about allowing artists of a certain background to explain their own positions, their own political, social, and cultural positions in the way that they are played out in their lives. That is, I think, is an issue that has been a big problem within the British theatre establishment. I mean, right now it's great to see a lot of writers like Inua Ellams, like Temi Wilkie, Bola Agbaje, Natasha Graham, you know, coming into the fore and writing their varying different experiences. Arinze Kene, you know, and doing really, really great work that actually not just tells a story, but also challenges the form in which those stories are told.
Yeah, I think that's a really very powerful point to stop this segment and just really open up to questions. I think you've really touched some actually you've already answered some of those questions, as I can say. But I want us to start from this point. So opening up to the questions that we've received. If you still got questions to send, please do send your questions and comments into the chat box. I'm going to start with the one which relates to what you're just talking about right now. So I'm going to invite Moji to ask her question about the challenges experienced in the industry. So you've talked about some of those challenges already. Moji's question is more about the advice you will give to younger people. So Moji, do you want to ask that question?
Yes, I mean Oladipo has already touched on my question really, but what advice would you give to younger writers or people who are just starting out?
Well, one of the things I would say is first, you've got to open yourself up to learning your craft. If you've got a favorite playwright, I mean, a lot of playwrights I know are very much influenced by writers from America, like your Lorraine Hansberry's, your August Wilson's. A lot of writers like myself were influenced by Nigerian playwrights like Wole Soyinka and Femi Asofison, whom I've already mentioned. But you must open yourself up to understanding what theatre is and what writing is. If you're writing for a medium, you must understand the medium. It's not enough just to say I'm a playwright and that is it. Because in a sense, when you write as a for your medium, you in a sense you visualize it. You have a sense in your head. Oh wow, this is how it's going to look. So you must understand stage, lighting, because it's not just writing. Playwriting is not just writing. Playwriting is making theatre. So that you've got to come with something. You must have some knowledge, see work. That's what I did when I started out. I did study theatre, but when I came to England, I saw a lot of plays before I started writing to understand what it means to write for the stage. Then there are loads of I don't know how the landscape will be post-COVID, but there are quite a lot of programs in terms of writer development. I know, that you've got a lot of performance development sessions running throughout the Creative Hub. And to attend as many of them, to have a three-dimensional view of what it means to write for the stage. See yourself not just as the stage, as a writer, but also as the actor, the set designer, and so on. That's number one. Number two, I think if you can get a mentor. I was, again, as I said, I was quite lucky that B. Bandele, was very kind in he read my first draft. He as well as giving me advice and taking me out. He'd take me out to lunch to sit down and talk about the whole industry. And that was part of my information gathering. You know, what is the industry like? I remember telling him when I got a rejection from a venue, and I was still in my very much what I would call my Nigeria phase then. I was like, I'm going to write to the venue and tell them who their fathers are, you know, sort of thing like that. And he was like, Doto, where do you think you are? You're not in Nigeria. What to do? Bolekaja nonsense. No. Just forget them. You know, there are other venues. You know, forget them. There are other venues. Do your research on which venues you want to send your work to as well. But back to the mentor, also, there's a way you also have to manage your mentor. Don't forget that your mentor is also, if he's a writer or works in theater, is also working on their own projects. So they may not always be able to give you like 100%. And a lot of the times, the mentor is also doing other stuff like teaching, you know, in a university or in a college as well. So there's a way in which you yourself have to manage your mentor, not dump, 100 drafts on them. I did have one young person that I mentored that sent me 3 drafts of the same play at the same time, you know, because if you do that, it gets to a point where anytime they see your email, it's like, oh God, you know, this one again, you know, so you don't want that kind of relationship. But find a mentor. Don't be afraid to somebody that you admire to go up and ask them, you know. So even if they can't read your work, if they can meet with you every month, give you ideas or information about theater in general or about a venue in particular, do that. Then what else? If you can form your own groups, I've got friends, a lot of actor friends do that a lot in particular, who actually form groups when one of them starts to write a play and they sit together and they do readings. One of that is that when you hear your work heard aloud, it's very, very different than to you just reading it on the page. So if you've got friends, even if you don't have other writer friends, but you've got a play you think it's really good, you know, get people together to read it out aloud for you so you can hear it and to give you feedback. Feedback is always important. The thing about writing a play is that it's a process and it's never a finished project, even when it's on stage. A lot of Broadway shows like Hamilton and so on, they go through years. Hamilton took 6 years from page to stage. And and a lot of Broadway shows like that, they tour. And the writers are constantly rewriting as they are touring before they enter Broadway. If you're a writer who's just starting out, you won't have that infrastructure, but you can find ways of creating a similar kind of infrastructure with your friends, that can help you in terms of developing your craft.
Thank you, Dipo. We've got some more questions. I'm going to invite Dora and Sharon to ask their questions because those two questions are quite related. So Dora, if you're there, you want to mute yourself. And Sharon, get ready next.
Yes, hi. I wanted to ask, because I'm based in London, and given what's happening at the moment with a lot of political developments in the country, how well is British theatre adapting to the aspirations of BAME writers?
Thank you, Dora. Sharon, do you want to ask your question as well? And then Dipo will respond to both of them together.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I've lost my chat, so I can't see exactly the question that I wrote for you there.
I'm happy
will you read it out for me? Thank you.
Yeah, that's the problem. So Sharon is asking, do you think it's a pivotal time for Black creatives in the industry to be recognized as creatives in their own rights? Not just Black creatives, but creatives in their own rights.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that before the shutdown, before the lockdown, there was this spate of Black and Asian creatives being appointed as artistic directors of buildings. We had already had Induruba Singham at the Kiln, and then we had Lynette Linton at the Bush, and then we had at the Royal Exchange in Manchester. Yes, that's right, at Royal Exchange in Manchester. So it almost felt like things were beginning to, to improve. And then, of course, then Kwame Kwei-Armah took over at the Young Vic. And so it started to feel like, oh, things are beginning to change, And it was great to see, particularly, in play like Lynette and Roy Alexander Wace at Manchester Exchange, that these were also young Black artistic directors taking over. That was and things seemed to really be moving, shifting slightly, but nonetheless shifting. Now where we are, that the worry is like, given the issues relating to COVID now, a lot of us are worried that the first thing that goes out the window is diversity, because that always has been the case. That's always been the experience of Black and Asian people in this country, is that, as soon as we meet with a financial problem, all of a sudden these programs are no longer affordable. And yet what these programs have proved time and time again, not just programs, but what we as creators have proved time and time again, is that our work, for want of a better word, sells. But what I really want to say is that we do bring in audiences. You look at the work of Inua Ellams at the National Theatre, you look at the play like Nine Nights that went to the National Theatre, transferred to the West End, and you see diverse audiences in a way that you'd never see for plays written by white writers. But somehow, once a problem like this arises, we are a liability. I've always advocated that the only way out of this vicious cycle is for us to build our own institutions. I really think that that is the only way, and for us to support our own institutions. Institutions like Utopia, like Talawa, like Theatre Fahodse, and to help to upscale them. Because I feel there's a point in which, yes, and I don't mean to be pessimistic to you, because I know we're all looking for hope in these times of trials, but I think there's also reality, yes, and like Beverly Thomas said, like Eclipse Theatre, whom I've worked with, that there needs to be, I think it's about supporting and upscaling those institutions, and making those institutions our prime focus. Because what normally happens is that at times like this, venues like the National Theatre, the Royal Court, the major theatre venues, more or less will not be allowed to go to the wire. They may have to restructure, they may have to lose staff. And what you've seen in terms of losing staff is that it's normally part-time staff, like front of house, where most of the staff are Black and Asian, you see. So those kind of problems, I don't think it's going to be very difficult to overcome them if we don't have our own institutions that we can support and help to grow, to upscale them, That for me is the only, that for me seems to be the only way to get out of this vicious cycle. I don't think anything else. It's great to say we're all taxpayers. We should all, the National Theatre should be open to all and everyone. Yeah, I think that there is a sense that that is true. But if you think about it outside of the general debate of ethnicity and gender, race and gender, and look at it from in terms of class, you'll find that a lot of working class, Black, white, Asian, will probably share the same feeling about the National Theatre as it being an elitist institution. And then that comes up and in contest with us, who are fighting for a bigger representation on that stage. What it represents to different people in terms of class, race, and gender might actually be very, very different things. But if we build our own institutions from the ground up that our people can see that we have a hand in and can take pride in, then I think that would be the way to go.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Beverly is agreeing with you here. She's saying that's why I made a small donation to Utopia last month, and we'll continue to do so. And Iroko Theatre is saying, well said, Dipo, our institutions with Black and ethnic minority financial support too. I think that's really important that we do establish. I remember when I was doing my PhD, one of the things I kind of looked at then was the failure of Talawa to achieve their own venue that they wanted to back then, and some of the politics around that that surrounded that. I did contact the I wanted to get the information, all the documents related to that, but they were embargoed, I think, for 50 years. So you can't even find out all the kind of funny politics that play behind the scene. But yeah, I think we need to start supporting ourselves. We're going to transit into the next segment now, but before then, I'm just going to invite Iroko Theatre. I think that's Alex, I hope. There's a curiosity question here that Iroko Theatre has. So to ask that question very quickly, and people, if you can give a quick answer to that, then we'll move to the next segment. So Iroko Theatre, do you want to unmute and ask your question of curiosity? You need to scratch that itch. Go on. No? Okay. So Iroko Theatre is saying, is your brother still involved? Oh, there we are. Alex, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question quickly? I think it's important when you've got an itch that you kind of give it a scratch. Go on.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to know if Dipo's brother is still involved in the arts. You know, right from that early age, both of you were, already involved in collaborating. Is he still doing any of that at the moment?
Okay. Hi, Alex. Well, let's just. I think the short answer is no. I think because it's become. I think the older we get, the more like our people we become. So it's all this. What is this useless fine art you are doing? It has captured him. So I'm afraid it's. Most of our parents always thought that things like fine art and theater was things that were done by vagrants. So yeah, I think he's at that stage now, I'm afraid.
Until you win the Nobel Prize, then suddenly you are the proudest.
Exactly.
Proudest achievement, yeah. All right, so thank you everyone for your patience. We're going to transition into our next segment. In this segment, we're going to be looking at how do you develop how do you craft your stories? So Dipo, I guess the question to start here will be to say, where do you look for inspiration for stories? And how do you know when you found the right one? So you want to write a story, a play, where do you look for inspiration for stories? And how do you know when you found the right one?
Oh, wow. I think that's where this idea of reading and research comes in. When I started writing, it was very much about the first sort of attempts I did at writing in Nigeria were about family, because that's what I knew, it's what I understood. And then later when I came to England, early morning came out of the fact that although I didn't work as a cleaner, but I used to work in a store. I was, I worked in a branch of Superdrug, and I do the morning deliveries and stuff. So we'd all be there at the same time with the cleaners and stuff. And I kept thinking to myself, the most, because you get up at 5 a.m. in the morning and you're on a bus. And one of my local buses is the bus 137, which goes into Oxford Street. And at 5 a.m., it's just filled with Black people, mostly Africans, going to work to clean offices, and they're on their way back home and then all of a sudden, as it gets towards opening hour, the crowds become whiter and whiter and whiter. So that was how I got that idea for early morning. But in general, ideas can come from anywhere. If you read a lot about many writers, they tell you all sorts of things about how stories came along. You know, Roy Williams's Fallout came from the Damilola Taylor case. You know, and but more specifically in the way in which it was handled. So it can be anything. No story is too small. When you think of one of the greatest domestic stories in the Death of a Salesman, Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman, it's a domestic story. It's a story about his father, but it's regarded as one of the greatest American plays. You know, so that's if you think of something like August Wilson, who's very much inspired by jazz, and you've seen and music, and you know a play like Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, you know, you can see the links between it. You know, you write out of interest, out of what interests you and what inspires you. You can also write out of what angers you. And because I think a lot of times we creators, we believe that we can set the world to rights, you know. So there are many stories, ways in which you can be inspired. But I think the main thing is don't think that any story is too small, even if it's, particularly if you're writing about your experience and what you know or the life you've lived, it isn't too small. But yeah, and that would be the main thing I would advise.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we keep this momentum of this particular segment going, because I really want to get a lot of questions and comments from people, because here we're really talking about practical stuff here. So if you do have questions, please do keep them coming. Don't wait for the end, because I'm going to go with questions I see before we get to the end of it. You've mentioned this, Dipo, already. You've talked about the value of going to see other work in theater, and perhaps reading other people's play as well. Could you emphasize a little bit more why is it important? What's the value of reading and seeing other people's work as a kind of emerging playwright? Why? Or have you stopped doing that, by the way?
No, I haven't stopped. It is very important because you need to know the basics of what it is to construct a story. There are different ways of telling stories. There isn't one way of telling a story, but if you read as many as you plays, or see as many plays as you can, at least you have a sense and an understanding of what it means to construct a story. You're not just looking at the play itself, but also what the audience responds to and why do they respond to it. So you go to you go to learn, but you go to learn with a critical eye. You go to analyze, not just to say, oh, well, that was nice, that was good, or, you know, or I didn't like it. I didn't like the play. Yes, that's a personal judgment, yes. But what if everybody else around you liked it, you know? Then you'd have to ask, well, why did they like this play and why didn't I like it? What did it say to them? How was it constructed? Because plays, what they are, when you write a play, what it is I would describe it as an emotional map of experiences. That's what a play is. And that's why most of the times we always want to start with characters. They're emotional maps of experiences. And people respond to experiences because people empathize with the character. They feel what a character, when a character is in pain, they laugh when a character laughs. They laugh at scenes that are funny. They feel sad when scenes are tragic. So that's what you're looking at mostly. It is how has the writer contoured the emotions in line with the character of a play that has created something that creates an emotional response in an audience. You can have the most beautifully constructed play, 3-act structure, beginning, middle, end, and all that. If it is devoid of that quality, of that emotional experience, it is nothing more than an exercise, you know. If you're writing a play, you can also approach a play from an intellectual point of view. But at the same time, the same thing applies. It is, you are talking to other human beings. The thing about any kind of work is that you are trying to communicate. to an audience. One way or another, you are trying to communicate. And what you're trying to see is what's the best way of getting that communication across to my audience. If I can throw in a dance scene here, because I don't think I can express this thing in words, throw it in there. But what it means though is that you can justify why you did it. Because you speak to a lot of young writers and say, oh, so there's this thing there, well, what was it there for? And I heard this a lot when I went to a conference in Lagos a few years ago. And most people were waiting for this fantastic response from the creator. And oh, I just did it there. It was just something, you know, I thought, oh, that's good. I just throw it in there. And you're like, oh God. And you could see everybody just staying like, you know, oh my God, you know, because they thought they threw him a softball, like, yo, you know, he's gonna, and, oh crap, we shouldn't have asked him the question, you know. You're in control. You see yourself as a creative. And that's why I said you need to know about everything: lighting, design, music, dance, movement, because these are things, it's not just writing characters and having two characters just talking to each other. You can, if you feel, you can have dance or movement. These are all aspects of theater. So it's about getting your story across the best way, the most effective way possible.
Thank you so much. I like what you said about a place, an emotional map of experience. I think that's a powerful quote right there, and I'm gonna steal it. Okay, you've kind of answered some of this already, but I'm going to ask you because I think there is an angle there I'd like you to focus on. You've talked about the idea of writing the plot, watching other plays, reading other plays to kind of understand how people are doing it, why things work and why they don't work. So you've talked about some of these problems. So what would you say are the strategies then for overcoming the common problems you've seen which are associated with things like creating dialogue, plot, character, conflict within the play? So what are some of these common problems, and what kind of strategies can someone adopt in addressing them in their playwriting?
Thank you, Kene. Well, because you're quite right, that is a big issue, and it affects all writers of experience. You know, you may think, oh, this writer's written 20, 30 plays, he's written for 30 years. I tell you this, when they meet the blank page, or you know, the blank screen, it is the same terror that a first-time writer has. It is with terror, like, oh God, how do I fill this, you know, these words on this page? And that's why we normally say, in a lot of theater writing development, we no more longer say we write a play, we now say we develop a play. And that's for better, for worse, for whatever it entails. And the main thing I used to start off with when I started off was with ideas. Because what happens is that why I did that is because I was looking, I thought that was the best kind of dramatic engine that I could use to tell a story. And by dramatic engine, I mean something that, you know, goes on underneath the hood of a play that keeps on running dramatically. It keeps on giving stories to you so that you can complete that story from beginning to the end. So I would always ask questions. What if? So that's how Early Morning came out. It's like, what if 3 Black cleaners decided that they were fed up with their situation in England and decided that they would overthrow the government? And when you ask that question, what it does is it gives you a roadmap to where you're going. So if I were to say I wanted to write about, say, for instance, an incident that happened, let's say the Brixton riots, for instance, in the 1980s, already that gives me a frame of reference. I know who the characters are going to be. You know, there would be those who took part in the riot. I can then divide them into somebody who supports the riot and somebody who doesn't support the riot. Because what you're looking for, as you said, Kene, is conflict. All sort of major plays need a conflict at the heart of them. And that conflict has to be resolved. By the time we get to the end of the play, the conflict has to be resolved. So if I say I'm going to set a play in let's say, during the time of the Brixton riots, I've got my setting. I know it's going to be set in Brixton. I know it's going to be set in the 1980s. I know that it's going to involve the police. I know it's going to involve the protesters. I could have a parent from a previous generation who doesn't agree with what the young people are doing. So already, by the time when you've set up that, either a dramatic statement or a dramatic question, already you start to see the characters, the setting, the location, they start to unfold. And in a sense, that's your starting point. And then the question is to say, well, what interests me the most? Would I want to say, put a love story in front, make this partly a love story? Do I want to make it a political story? Do I want to make it a tragedy? Do I want to make it a comedy? What you're doing basically as a writer is you're making choices, because that's what you do. You can't tell the whole of that story. So you need to find something, a storyline that can focus on at least a person or people, but will also involve the politics, the culture, and the history of that period as well. Because you can never tell the whole story. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We can never tell the whole story. It's a process of prioritizing which stories work and which stories speak to the people. Which one tell your story, the story that you want to tell in the best way possible. So thank you for that. Actually, kind of following on from that, how do you find your voice as a playwright? So is this something you ever find at all? So how do you stand out from the competition? A lot of people are writing plays. How do you stand out so that when people encounter your play, there's something about your play that draws them in? How do you find your voice?
Yeah, well, I think that actually comes from you as a writer. I think we all have our voices, but in a sense, but they're shaped by our life experience. Because my experiences, earlier I mentioned all my experiences growing up in Nigeria, being influenced by comedies, and coming and living in England. So my voice is shaped by the many experiences that I've had. My worldview is shaped by my experiences as well. So I think it is something that we develop. Because I like writing comedies, like writing satires. There's a way in which my voice sort of, comes out. I think that's the best way that my voice ever comes out is in comedies. It isn't that I haven't written other types of plays. I've written for young people. I've written science fiction. I've adapted a book by Kester Abston called The Hounding of David Oluwale, which is a very tragic story. But people always say, "Oh, there was that scene," and I say, "Yes, I knew it was you." I say, "Yeah, only Dipo could have written that scene there." So it comes out. It comes out based on who you are in terms of your life experiences. I can't write like Kwame Kweyama. Kwame Kweyama can't write like me because we share very different experiences. We have different ways of seeing the world. But we can come together as sort of being labeled as Black writers because we sort of deal with same issues. So you can write a story that is the same as somebody else, as 3 or 5 other writers. Let's say you want to write a story about, say, Fela Kuti, for instance. Somebody who is very much of a feminist bent will write about Fela Kuti very differently than somebody who is very much believes that, say, the problems of Black people is to do with the emasculation of Black men, for instance. And that's just to do with belief, So your voice, normally what comes out of from your pen is what is already within you.
Yeah, so it's really important that we gather as many life experiences as we can. I think one of the things I tell my students when I teach acting is that to be a very good actor, whatever that means to you, to be a very good artist, whatever that means to you, you've got to live life. So don't be afraid to live life. So live it, because those experiences inform how you tell your story.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you very much, Ipo. So this is the end of this segment, because like I said, these two segments, we are really moving rather more quickly with them. And I'd like to invite Rumi, who's got a question. The question was asked much earlier, but I've kind of deferred it to now because I think it's a question that fits more within this segment. So Rumi, you're there. You want to unmute yourself and ask your question about the handing of David Olawale.
Yeah, thanks very much for this morning's discussion. It was really about your play, The Hounding of David Olawale. I wanted to know about the processes of adapting Kester Aspden's book into the play. And I'm particularly interested to ask you about kind of taking on the white gaze on a Black narrative, and then you, as a Nigerian British writer, responding to that. I mean, I have some thoughts about it, but I'd like to hear from you first, because I saw it twice. And I'd really love, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. When I always tell the story of how I came to adapt the play. I went into a bookshop, and there was this power display of the book in hardcover. And if you remember the title originally, I mean, they've stopped using the title now in subsequent editions, but the title of the first edition was Nationality Wog, The Hounding of David Olawale. And I was a bit like, whoa, what's going on here? What in heaven's name is this? And so there were two things that I had a problem with. One was that it was the title Nationality Wog. And two, it was the fact that it was called Olawale, because I think most Yoruba people will say it's that I'm not quite sure that that's an odd, articulation of the name, because normally we'd have Olawale or Adewale or Oluwole. So, and I'd not met any Nigerian or any Yoruba person who said that who goes by that name. So I thought, again, it's another kind of Western appropriation of the name. Anyway, I said, I'll buy the book when it comes out in paperback, when it's much cheaper. Then the following week, I got a call from the West Yorkshire Playhouse in Leeds, asking me if I'd be interested in adapting a book. And I asked them what was the title, and they said it was called The Hounding of David Olawale. And I burst out laughing, and they asked me what was funny, and I said, well, you've just saved me, £12.99, So they sent me the book, I read it, and I was outraged. One of the reasons why I was outraged was I'd never heard of the story before, so I was angry at myself for not knowing the story. Although there's a mention of it in Peter Fryer's book, Staying Power, which I must have forgotten, because I'd read that book and I must have forgotten it because it was, and then I realized it was because it was such a short entry. And I asked my aunts, I have still quite a lot of aunts, my Nigerian aunts who live in England, about it. And they said, oh yeah, isn't that the gentleman that died in Leeds, that drowned in the river? They all remember the story. All of them. Not one of them said, I haven't, who? Not one of them, when I asked them if they'd heard of David Olawale. But they were all asking me, well, why are you bringing it up now? And I said, well, why not? So in the end, I was commissioned. I said, yes, of course, I'm going to adapt it. And I set about the process of adapting it. At first, it was actually very difficult. I actually was the emotional trauma of adapting it. At first, I didn't realize how badly it had affected me until I watched it on opening night. And I was at the back. Fortunately, I was at the back, so nobody could see that I was crying throughout the show. But even when in rehearsals, one of the actors, I think for those of you who've watched it, I think Beverly said, I think you mentioned that you've watched it, but during rehearsals, one of the actors broke down. One of the big actor, if those of you who've seen the show, the big actor, the main actor that keeps beating up David Olawale in rehearsal broke down because he couldn't take it anymore. And we had to halt rehearsal for about an hour and a half just to make sure he was all right. But the process of adapting, I first worked on my own with a dramaturg Alex Chisholm. And then later on, Eclipse said that they would take on the project. And so Eclipse took over. So I started to work with the director, Dawn Walton. And then she was saying to me, look, it would be a good idea if, rather than just adapt the book, you're a Nigerian, you've got certain experiences that a lot of these, that anyone else in the room doesn't have. Why not take us back to David and let us see moments of David before his tragedy? Because it wasn't just the death of David Oluwale that was tragic. It was the last 8-10 years of his life in England, when he had a mental breakdown and spent about 8 years in an asylum, and the kind of treatment that he received. So I had to go over those 8 years. And in the last 2 years of that life, he was hounded by these 2 policemen. So you've got these scenes where even the venue, in terms of adaptation and in terms of the white gaze, it's interesting. The police station where it all happened, those of you who know Leeds, the police station where it happens is across from the Leeds Playhouse. So we have the poster. When the posters went up, this massive poster is looking directly at the police station. So thank you, Milgarth. Not Menston was the name. Thank you, Romy. Milgarth is the name of the police station. Sorry, Menston was the name of the asylum where he was in for about 8 years. And so the venue a bit, thank you, Beverly. Thanks, Beverly, showing the cover of the play text. So how do I put it? God, sorry. The venue were a bit worried because of the explicit displays of violence. And one of the reasons why was because the police were one of the funders of West Yorkshire Playhouse. So they were a bit like, oh, you're going to show all this? And I said, yeah, of course. It's in the story. It's not like it isn't. We're not making it up. All the acts of violence in the play were not made up. They were in the book and they were recorded as having taken place. So, so we put them up because we thought, this is our story. Particularly once Dawn came abroad, she said, this is our story. It's not their story. Yes, it's a lead story, but it's our story too. So I would say, go for it. Just do it the way you would see it done. And I'm here with you all the way. And that's exactly what she did. So we worked on that. And then she wanted me to stop talking to the dramaturg because the dramaturg was white. It was a lovely lady, but she was like, yes, but we're going in a different tangent now. And it helped. This is why, again, we need people again, it's in practical terms. It's very difficult for an individual, for one of us to go into a white space and be the only person there. It's very different. It's difficult. But when you do have somebody else supporting you, it's much easier because then you're on the right track. You know that you're not making things up when certain things happen. And you know that you're constantly, that there's somebody there to constantly fight battles with you. But that person also understands. They're not doing it out of some sort of paternalistic thing. They're doing it because they understand exactly where you're coming from. So I was very fortunate, again, to have Dawn with me on that. I mean, in the end, West Yorkshire Press, they did allow. They didn't. It's not a case of they allowed. They well, there's nothing they could do. They show this was the play. So that's it. So and so to their credit, it went on as exactly as how we wanted it. And that was that. So, but it does make it much easier when there are other people in the building who share the same experience that you have. That was one way of subverting, as it were, the white gaze. Another thing I did was language. In terms of dramaturgy, we decided to go with different registers of language. Usually for Black African characters, there would be a kind of, particularly of that period, there'd be this kind of assumption that, you know, they've come from a certain educational background, so you get this sort of standard English. But I wrote David's character more in a sort of Nigerian English style, because I wanted him to be, his experience to be closer, a lot closer to the Black audiences, that when they come in to that space, there is no form of alienation because of the language, that I wanted them to make sure that they 100% understood, because there's only a way, it's through language that you get certain kind of connections. If I write in a certain way, you know, where a certain people understand it, it's quite different when they come into a space. They know that, oh, this play is for us. This play is actually for us. This guy's speaking, they're speaking our language, because we've experienced things like this, but there has never been anybody on stage who has articulated it in this way, in this manner of speaking, in this manner of behaving. So that was also that was very important. My choice of language, I thought, I even had, funny enough, had some Nigerians come to say, why did you write it in that way? Couldn't you have just spoken the standard English? And I said, no, he couldn't have. Because you know, people like that, they were thrown away by society, and I'm not going to allow them to be thrown away by society again by giving them a different kind of representation, a different kind of character, who is worthy of our sympathy and our pity. So yeah, that was those were some of the ways in which we worked to try to avert the white gaze.
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of other questions, but unfortunately our time is out. But I just want to kind of give you one more opportunity. We've got a couple of comments around this area about the relevance or the continued relevance of this play that we're talking about right now. What do you say? What do you say as kind of like a final statement here about the relevance of the handing of David Olawale and what's going on at the moment with the death of George Floyd? Do you see more interventions like you did with the handing happening, either from yourself or from other playwrights? What do you see as the role of white allies in telling these kind of stories?
Well, God, that's a tough question, but it's a very relevant question. In terms of the first part, in terms of the importance of the play today and of the book, The Hounding of David Olawale, I think you're quite right that it's still relevant till today, because one mistake we shouldn't make is to assume that because we don't see the kind of violence that we see in America, that it doesn't take place in the UK. It does. It has always taken place, and will continue to take place if we're not vigilant or we allow it to slip. So yes, a play like The Hounding of David Olawale is something that will always be there on the conscience to remind people that these things have happened and continue to happen. And I think writers will continue to write about those stories because they continue to happen. It's very hard to escape. I think there's nobody more fed up of talking about race than Black people, I think. I actually believe that there is no one. And the reason why I say that is because that narrative is set by somebody else, not us. Most of us would rather go about our daily business, living our ordinary lives, aspiring, wanting the best for ourselves, for our children, and for our loved ones. But we keep finding ourselves in a situation where we keep being pulled back to discuss this thing. And Toni Morrison mentioned it, about how, the trick of society, white society, is to keep on banging on and on, making us bang on and on about race. The moment we say we are, they'll say things like Africans had no culture, then we spend 100 years fighting to explain that to prove to them that we do, as if we have nothing else better to do with our lives. That is an issue in which we have been put into, And that's why a play like The Hounding of David Oluwale is necessary. And a lot of other plays that you see by Black writers dealing with those issues will never, will sadly will always continue to be there. So what is sorry, I've forgotten the other part of the question.
I think you have addressed the question really. I think you have. I was asking about the role of white allies in this debate, but I think you've kind of already hinted at it in your response. Unless you have anything specific to add, I'm happy to leave it there. Just to say thank you to Oladipo Agboluaje for such a wonderful conversation, and to every one of us who's been here asking questions. I'm really sorry I couldn't get around to some of the questions in the chat, so please do forgive me for that. But before we end the session, I grew up in Lagos. I schooled in Ilori, and my experience of going to the theater was that we were not very quiet and polite and just waiting for the show to end. And you've all been very polite and waiting for the end. So I'm going to give you the next 1 minute to unmute your mic and echo Dipo, say whatever you want to say to him and whatever. If he can hear you, he can respond. If he doesn't hear, that's fine. Everybody at the same time, unmute yourself and just make some noise to Dipo. Thank you very much, Dipo.
Thank you very much. It was fantastic.
Thank you, Dipo. Thank you.
Lots of notes taken.
Nice to see you, Dipo. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I'm writing for England. Thank you.
I'm going to try and be a writer like you now, Dipo.
So I should have muted your. Patrice, I should have muted your sound so you wouldn't hear me. Come and steal my secret.
I raised my hand, but obviously your moderators were scared of my question. So
what was your question?
I'm handing over to.
Too late now.
I'm handing back over to Utopia Theatre to end the conference. Please go ahead.
Don't ask any questions. Too late. We should have allowed you when you wanted to.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And yes, and have a blessed day.
Yeah.
See you all again in another
Looking forward
session.
to seeing everybody's work.
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.